Since I was a child in grade school, I've admired Martin Luther King Jr. I was always grateful to know that he was the main reason why I was able to have an array of friends of different races and ethnicities. And I was able to sit on the bus wherever I wanted or play with whoever I wished. I was thankful for what I could comprehend Dr. King to be at that age. But year after year, I was taught basically the same thing, that Dr. King, the civil rights activist, and the civil rights movement basically saved the world from racism. But although my experiences in school showed me otherwise. But when you're taught year after year the same thing, that racism basically isn't such an issue anymore, at that age, you dismiss racist cases and make them into isolated situations, or worse, make excuses for them. Sadly, looking back in grade school, I realized how I somehow unconsciously equated passiveness with Dr. King. I always heard that he was nonviolent and peaceful, and that was the key element to his success. But the reason why he was nonviolent was never put in proper context. It was always a little confusing to me. How can a man be passive and submissive and change the world? It was not until the latter part of high school, specifically in college, where I started doing my own research on the civil rights era, seeking out knowledge and information, seeking out different various activists that I've never taught in school. I began craving this knowledge due to my own challenges as a Black individual within a predominantly white community, and also for my admiration for this group. I read various books and countless articles and journals on living and non-living civil rights activists like Dick Gregory, Ida B. Wells, John Lewis, the Freedom Riders, and of course Martin Luther King. And the more I read about these pivotal people in history, the more I realized that the civil rights era was indeed a movement, but it was also a rebellion. One of the main reasons why we mentioned in our program that we believe Dr. King has been whitewashed and that his methods of activism has been desensitized to be palatable to the masses is due to how people will speak against the efforts of Black activism. But in the same breath, it will tell you, be more like MLK. Whether it's to the BLM groups or the NAACP or other Black organizations, they will say that these groups are troublemakers, or thugs, or hateful criminals, and try to silence our efforts with their unsolicited suggestions to be more like MLK. They told that to Colin Kaepernick when he kneeled. They told that to the first wave of Black Lives Matter protesters who marched for Trayvon Martin. They said that to Bree Newsom, who took down the Confederate flag in South Carolina. It seems like a general population of people who inwardly have no interest in Black equity are instead of expressing their sentiment truthfully, they ironically use MLK to water down their bigotry, as if trying to synonymously refashion King's persona into passiveness or obedience or submissiveness, when those descriptions are actually the antithesis of who he was and what the movement stood for. We want to do our part with reclaiming his legacy today and taking out the stigma of what was necessary during the 50s and 60s. Dr. King even said, "I became convinced that non-cooperation with evil is as much of a moral obligation as cooperation with good. Also, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws." Dr. King and the civil rights activists were disobedient. They were defiant, they weren't subordinate, they weren't uncontrollable, and they were unlawful, but it was all necessary. It was a righteous rebellion. Their method of being nonviolent did not mean to be compliant or docile or passive or tame. It meant to be nonviolent to the disruption that they would undoubtedly cause. Dr. King knew that violence would be the effect to their cause, but told his constituency not to participate in it, but to defiantly and controllably stand against it, civil disobedience. This new awakening, if you will, of what this movement truly was, inspired me these past years in activism, and the reason why we've implemented his methods and philosophies within the infrastructure of our organization. And when I'm constantly told, and I'm pretty sure people of color can attest to this, when you talk about Black equity or if you talk about equal rights, people will try to shut you up and say, slavery's over, or Obama's president, or my favorite, what about Oprah and Beyonce, they're Black. That doesn't mean that the fight for Black equity is over, and being resilient for equity is not wrong, it's our right. So right now I want to give 7 examples of how Dr. King has influenced my activism. Number 1 and number 2, sacrifice and tact. Dr. King sacrificed his life for activism. He's a prime example of what it takes to conquer the world and change it. He once said, "Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice and suffering and struggle." It's hard to even talk about my so-called struggles and sacrifices in the same breath as Dr. King. But with that said, one major thing his sacrifices taught me is not to complain about mine. Here's one of the reasons why we can even start a Black Lives Matter here. Although it does not mean that we have not faced challenges. I and the rest of this group and the board have been called derogatory names. We have been threatened and we have been challenged. But it didn't surprise me. I knew that this was a part of it, and it's just an iota of what the civil rights activists had to endure and suffer through. Which brings me to tact and why it's so important. I realized as a leader of the group, every comment I put out there becomes a narrative, becomes a rhetoric of this organization. Sometimes it's really hard to hold your tongue, especially when you know that you're right. But not every battle is meant to be fought, and being right isn't always a useful win. I hate to overuse this quote because I feel like it gets taken out of context a lot. But when Martin Luther King said, "Hate does not drive out hate, only love can do that," he was really right. Nowadays, tact is something a majority of today's society has lost, especially with today's racial climate. But if Dr. King can remain tactful and keep the dignity that he did under the pressure he was under, then there's no excuse for me or any of you to follow suit. That brings me to number 4, organization and patience. Dr. King might have been one of the most patient and organized people of his time. He had vision, he had focus, he had a dream, and he led with it. Every protest, every march, every boycott had to have ultimate organization. He had to map out the blueprint for their success in order for their demands to be achieved. It goes without saying that this type of organization was a part of the construction of Black Lives Matter Columbus. Writing out the vision before establishing this group was vital. Having patience with that process was crucial. We had to adapt our demographic within our blueprint. Columbus is not like Chicago or Ferguson, but it does not mean that we're immune to this possibility. Which is why being a proactive and educational tool within the community with race relations and a facilitator of unity has become our primary goals. Dr. King once stated, "Just as lightning makes no sound until it strikes, the Negro Revolution generated quietly. But when it struck, the revealing flash of its power and the impact of sincerity displayed a force of frightening intensity." We as a group made sure that each message, each vocation, each meeting, each event we did is sincere and significant. We make sure that each act has a meaningful impact, but that impact cannot be forced. That patient lightning strike that Dr. King mentioned before it is how the civil rights movement worked. Yes, it took time for the Civil Rights Act to make it through legislation, but eventually made it through. Which brings me to number 5, faith. There is no secret that Dr. King was a God-fearing man, and that faith was a part of the infrastructure of his movement. His quote, "Never let a man pull you so low as to hate him," has become my personal mantra. Do not hate the racist or the bigot, but to hate the bigotry and the racism. I am a spiritual person, I believe in Jesus Christ, and I have to say, I've never prayed as much these past 7 months to serve this group than I have in a long time. However, I'm aware that many of my members, whether on the board or within the group, do not share the same faith as myself. Likewise, the civil rights movement was a gamut of different creeds and religions, and people came together to fight for the common good, even with differences. I believe strongly that the same sentiment should be adopted today. At the end of it all, we are brothers and sisters, and should support each other against violence and hatred no matter our differences. I feel that this is the essence of godliness, and should be the essence of how we all are, and was the essence of MLK's leadership. Last but not least, Dr. King has taught me to be unapologetic and resilient. There are many things I had to be unapologetic for when starting this group. And I'm not going to say them all because we'll be here past 9 o'clock, but I'll just name 2. One minor one is my age, the fact that I'm 27 years old. I don't think that's really young, but I have been challenged on that fact. The fact that I haven't grown up under Jim Crow in the South, or I haven't endured real racism. And not comparing myself to Dr. King, because I would never do that in a million years, but he was in his late 20s when he led a movement that changed the world. and many of those activists were my age or younger. People's visions and dreams should not be stricken because certain people weren't given the eyes to see it. I believe if you have a sincere vision, you're never too young to lead, and Dr. King is an example of that. Another major issue I have to be unapologetic about is our name, Black Lives Matter. I understand that this name has stigma attached to it due to people that are against this group. Nationally, Black Lives Matter has been accused of being a terrorist group, being the Black KKK, a group of kids who want to cause violence, who hate police, who hate the white community, who want to divide and separate. But this is 100% false, and Black Lives Matter 100% condemns violence and division. We seem like an extreme group because we're not docile in our approach. That's the reason being, is because of who came before us. From our ancestors who escaped undergrounds, to Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights activists who marched over the Edmonds Bridge. This generation has an archive of evidence, or what we might say, we have the receipts, of how resistance, determination, and guts can prevail over the impossible. We are in a new era, and with a generation of activists, there needs to be a nuance. Because of the era before us, we have certain laws in place to better protect us and our rights to protest and organize. And using these rights to their capacity is a must. We should no longer pacify our rightful demands as citizens. Being a part of Black Lives Matter means we will fight against unlawful killings motivated by race. That we will fight against profiling due to the darkness of our pigment. That justice will be served when we're unlawfully murdered by law enforcement. That we will no longer accept the false ideology that we're inherently violent, bad, or trouble because we weren't born white. That the criminal justice system and police force should be reformed now. We are not second-class citizens, we are not animals, we are not 3/5 of a person. We are Black Americans, owed our rights. We are unapologetic, and we are resilient. Two things I know I have to be, and two things Dr. King taught me. So when I'm in my moments where I get overwhelmed, or I think things are really tough, or where I think things might not change, I always say to myself, if those came before me, and my ancestors who revolted, escaped underground, couldn't stand, survive, and fight, if the civil rights activists could fearlessly protest counters and boycott buses, march over bridges, endure Bloody Sunday, suffer bearable beating after beating, and killing after killing after killing due to the righteous fight, if they can do all of that then there's no reason why I or any of us in this room can't stand up now. Thank you.